Guidance is internal. Ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Permission to board. Permission to come aboard. Permission to board. Permission to bring me aboard. Permission to come aboard.
Welcome to the Permission Granted podcast. Here's DA.
Welcome inside episode number 4 of the Permission Granted podcast, everybody. Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed the podcast before, you maybe just be getting related to it right now, listening to it for the first time, you can subscribe to us 2 different ways. On iTunes, by going there and clicking subscribe. You will get it on your mobile device, your iPad, your iPod, your iPhone. Also, we are on YouTube, youtube.com/The DA Show. We are always available there each and every week. So later on in the podcast, Mraz and Brock are going to drop on by. They're going to be bickering about something. I think week 1 of the NFL action. Also, Cowboys fans are on the ledge after just week 1. They're one of our most vocal fans here on the show. And I think Mraz actually has some bragging rights because he's beating Brock right now in his picks, and that's never a good thing for those two to get along. So we'll hear from them as well a little bit later on. But we start off with our long-form interview guest, and very excited. This is a guy that you probably are familiar with from his television work. He spent a long time at SportsCenter and for ESPN, and then also has now been kind of the face of the studio action for Big Ten Network for years since they launched. It's Dave Revsine, and he's got a brand new book out. He is broadcaster turned author, yes, and originally investment banker turned broadcaster turned author. The book is about the kind of the beginning of college football, and it's really interesting. The book is called The Opening Kickoff, The Tumultuous Birth of a Football Nation, and Dave joins us here. Dave, how are you?
I'm great, Damon. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. We're huge college football fans here on the show, and so having the college football season back is fantastic. Ton of storylines. But it's interesting going into year 1 of the college football play because we've spoken so much about controversy and scandal. And we'll start with this. Your book kind of goes into this 100 years ago. Would you say that there's more scandal today with college football or then?
Wow, that is a great question, Damon. And I don't think I put it in quite those terms, or I haven't really thought about it in those terms. It was different. You know, you were dealing with kind of the unregulated Wild West there. So just to give an example, one of the ones I bring up in the book, and it's just a real simple one to talk about, is in 1893, Michigan, of its 11 players, 7 of them weren't enrolled in school. Okay, so that sounds like, okay, that's preposterous, right? That's a scandal. But the truth of the matter is there were no regulations at that time. So part of it wasn't so much scandalous as it was just kind of not really having rules in place as to what it was or wasn't going to be. And so part of the formative years of the game and part of what I get into in the 25-year period that I cover most closely, which is 1890 to 1915, is this kind of process of figuring out, okay, like I know it seems basic, but should these guys actually be students? You know, is that part of the drill? And so in that sense, I think it's more scandal today. I think it was more just kind of the unregulated Wild West and just trying to define what the game was going to be.
You know, it's hard to put it into 2014 terms when you're talking about something over 100 years ago, but how much of college football back then was simply driven by money, just kind of the same thing that we're griping about today with college football?
A ton. I mean, that was probably the most eye-opening thing for me. And as I started to kind of connect the dots, because I didn't really set out to write this book, I was kind of doing research on a different topic, which was Pat O'Day, who was kind of the lead character in the book, who played at Wisconsin in the 1890s. And so I kind of started down his road of telling his story, and he had this bizarre personal story, a life that kind of went off the rails, but was also a huge superstar. But as I started reading about him, it just became apparent to me that all of these parallels between then and now. And one of the real illuminating things was there was this huge debate over finances between the University of Chicago, which now, you know, obviously doesn't even have a team, but at the time, or doesn't have a Division I team anyway, but at the time was the biggest powerhouse in the Midwest and one of the founding members of the Big Ten, and Wisconsin and Michigan. The Wisconsin-Michigan were on one side, Chicago was on the other, and it was all over finances. And basically Amos Alonzo Stagg, who's incredibly famous as the University of Chicago's head coach and one of the real pioneers of the game. His team was in an advantageous position financially because they were in a big city and they could draw a bigger gate. And he basically held everyone's feet to the fire and said, we're not going to split the gate receipts with you evenly. We're going to take more money than you're going to get. And it kind of reminds me of like the Longhorn Network, right? Where Texas said with those third-tier TV rights, we're not going to share all that money equally in the Big 12 because we can make more money than you can. And so if you don't like it, Texas A&M, you can go somewhere else. And that's what they did. And if you don't like it, Missouri, you can go somewhere else. And that's what they did. So, again, those parallels are amazing to me. And that was just one of them. I mean, the amount of money that we're talking about, the gate receipts. I mean, I talk about a game in the 1890s between Harvard and Yale where they split what would be today $3 million in gate receipts between them in 2014 money. I mean, we were talking staggering amounts of money, Damon, 125 years ago. And so for those who say kind of, I wish we could go back to the way it used to be, I think the big thing that this book shows you is it used to be exactly what it is right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So would it be more fair to say, I wish we could go back to, say, it was in the 50s or the 60s or something like that people still are nostalgic about? Or has it always been this way and we just kind of choose through rose-colored glasses to forget about it?
I think it's the latter. I think that we just kind of want to look at it in those terms, but I think that we've always wrestled with these issues. To a certain extent, Damon, I kind of think it depends how you want to view it, if you're a glasses-half-empty guy or a glasses-half-full guy. But the glasses-half-full perspective might be, you know what, it kind of lets us off the hook. It's always been bad. We've always wrestled with these challenges. And the kind of inherent in this idea of mixing athletics and academics, which is something that no other society in the world does, right? I mean, it's this bizarre construct, this marriage that seems so mismatched. And because of that, all of these problems are inherent in it, whether it's the academic debate, whether it's the recruiting scandals, whether it's the battles over finances, whether it's the incredible, overwhelming media coverage, which some might look at as good and some might look at as bad. But again, the media stuff goes back to the very beginning. All of those issues that the game is wrestling with today, it's been wrestling with since the get-go. Now, I would make the addendum that the scale and the scope have changed dramatically, and I talk about that in the book. I mean, obviously there's more money. Obviously the media is bigger. Again, all of those things are different size-wise, but the inherent issues that are at their core, all of those are the same.
See, that point that you bring up, I think, is a really important one, that we're the only country in the world that marriages high academics and athletic sport for huge revenue. And if you looked at maybe Europe and how soccer academies work, or you looked at the Dominican Republic and how baseball academies work, there is the marriage of industry and business and commerce and sport, and it has nothing to do with education. So since you went back to the beginning of college football, how did we start this? Why were the seeds planted in the States to have that combination of college and university and athletics that make a lot of money?
Such a good question. And I would say it boiled down to a couple things. The biggest one was probably PR, that the schools saw very quickly that this could be a public relations vehicle for them, that it was, people today refer to it as the front porch of the university. And that very quickly became the case. There was just this understanding that there was an intense competition very early on for students because you really had, in the late 1800s, people were founding universities and then kind of looking for students to serve. Like the model was kind of reversed. There was this huge frenzy of university founding. And so you had this issue where people were saying, well, how can we differentiate ourselves? Like, why would people come to our school versus some other school? And football became one way that they did that. And I use the University of Chicago, which is a great example. The University of Chicago was founded very late in the game. It was founded in the 1890s with money from the Rockefeller family, and they instantly wanted to compete with Yale and Harvard and Princeton. And to do that academically, you go out, you hire professors. I mean, it's a real challenge. You kind of have to build build an academic reputation, but you could build a football reputation in a year or two. And so that's what they decided to do. They hired Stagg, who was this huge superstar who had played at Yale, was nationally known. They hired him before the university opened its doors, before they even had doorknobs on the university. Stagg was at work trying to recruit players. They played their first game the first week that the school was in session. 2 years later, they sent the team on a barnstorming mission to the West. And the whole idea was public relations, to spread the word of the University of Chicago. There was an early professor there who said that the school had two missions in the world. One was to shed the light of knowledge on the Western world, and the other was to lick Michigan. And this is 5 years after the university was founded. So this is at the very beginning, Damon, this odd marriage. But again, the money was part of it, the public relations was part of it, and it was just a way for them to differentiate themselves from all of the other schools that were around.
This was a time also where football was really dangerous, and Teddy Roosevelt had to step in and try to make it far more safe because, I mean, kids were dying on the field, not just concussions. So today, one of the things that we hear about is, well, people love football because of the violence, but we need to get away from the bloodthirst. How much of that back then was tied into the popularity of college football?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that the game was popular in part because of the violence. I mean, I do think that there was this kind of vicarious enjoyment of sitting around and watching guys, you know, literally, sadly, beat one another's brains in at times. I mean, you mentioned guys dying on the field. 1905, 18 players died at all levels playing football. Roosevelt did intervene, as you said. He called all the leaders of the big three, which was Yale, Harvard, and Princeton, to the White House and basically told them to figure it out. I think his role has been overstated by some. There are some who've claimed he saved the game. I do not believe he saved the game. But he set it on a path to save itself, and he basically told them that you need to figure this out because this isn't going to work. And originally, they struggled to do that. In fact, 4 years later, there were 26 players who died playing football. So it got worse before it got better. Eventually, I think just kind of cooler heads prevailed. And there was this understanding some schools dropped the sport and that might happen more were it not for making some changes to make it safer. And the biggest one was the forward pass, which opened up the game, spread players throughout the field, and kind of minimized the intense contact. You had these kind of V formations where you'd have 10 guys from one team plow into another guy, and then the 11th would be the ball carrier behind them. That was outlawed, and they allowed the game to be spread out with the pass. And at least in the short term, that solved the problem. Now, as we know, that might have led to longer-term injuries, which is what we're seeing today with CTE and the concussions. But in the short term, at least you didn't have guys dropping dead on the field.
I forget where I read this. It might have been Sal Paolantonio's book a couple of years ago about the birth of football, but it had to do with how fans and I think administrators really like the ideal of the college football player because America had kind of turned the corner into industrialization, and that the years of pioneering and farming and all these kind of really traditional American traits were gone, and they were kind of worried that young men were not tough and strong anymore, so that college football was kind of an outlet and a teacher for that. How much did you see about that in terms of the dawn of the creation and popularity of college football?
Huge. You cannot overstate that point. There were movements afoot throughout the country that there was a feeling that the male population was, and it's offensive to us at this point to say this, but this is what they thought, was becoming feminized, becoming womanized, because there was this feeling that, you know what, people aren't out proving their manhood day to day, their virility. These guys used to be out whether they were fighting wars, it was a time of relative peace in the country, or whether they were chopping down trees or working as blacksmiths or miners. And now all of a sudden you had all of these people who were working behind desks, right? I mean, the society had changed so dramatically in how people made a living. And so there was this feeling of where would the virility and the strength come from? And football was a huge part of it. There was a movement I talk about in the book called muscular Christianity, where in Christianity there had been this portrayal of men, or really the portrayal of Jesus changed dramatically from, he was kind of this more of a reed thin kind of guy who was portrayed in that way for many years. with kind of the halo above the head, and then the portrayal of him changed in that time period, and you see the paintings of him, and he was more muscular. And there was this whole movement behind using Christianity as a way to spread the virility and the manhood message. It is totally fascinating to see how intertwined those were, and President Roosevelt was a huge part of that. I mean, he was a guy who, as you probably know, was very sickly as a young man, and he built himself up. He kind of overcame this asthmatic condition, and he had no patience for weakness in people. And so that was why he liked the game. He loved football, but he just felt like the overt violence had to be taken out of it. But you're right. I mean, that is a huge part of the movement, and it's really interesting. Obviously, it's offensive in some ways through the lens we look at it today, but it's really interesting to kind of see how that message was conveyed.
Yeah, and I guess I never thought about it, but is there maybe a parallel now that football's become so popular, college football's become so popular, the NFL and high school football, that there's also something there that as we modernize and get maybe farther and farther away from blue-collar work ethic and things of that nature, that there's something that the American public latches onto with football because it is kind of a throwback to a bygone era. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, right? I mean, I just think that it's an exciting sport, and it's distinctly American. And my book traces a lot of kind of how it evolved from initially soccer, really, but then within about 5 or 6 years, they were really playing rugby more than they were playing soccer. And how it evolved from that into football and kind of the rules that were put in place. Walter Camp was a huge part of that. Now, he ended up being one of the biggest and staunchest opponents of introducing the forward pass and really comes off very poorly in my book. But again, this evolution of the rules into a distinctly American game, and I think that it is for years, and again, for 125 years as I show it, it's been a way for people to congregate and come together and do something that we do in this country and that nobody else does. And the identity with that sport, I think, kind of as you talk about that bygone era, I think that is part of it, that this is our tradition. On Thanksgiving, we eat turkey and we watch football, and we've been doing that since the 1890s. I mean, the first chapter of my book is an 1893 game between Yale and Princeton in New York City on Thanksgiving Day. There were 50,000 people in the stands, and the New York Sun, one newspaper, sent 17 reporters to cover the game, one paper. So you get a sense. I mean, this is part of our tradition. This is who we are.
The book is The Opening Kickoff, The Tumultuous Birth of a Football Nation. Dave Revsine, the author. Now, you know Dave also from his broadcasting because he was formerly of ESPN, now Big Ten Network lead host there. And you jumped on the Big Ten Network when it launched back in 2007. And it's looked at now, 8 years later, 7 years later, as kind of the precursor to where every league wants to go. And now that we have the birth of the SEC Network, and among other things, the Pac-12 Network. When you went there in 2007, did you say this is where it's going, or you couldn't really know that at that time?
Well, I'd like to say I was some sort of a visionary, Damon. I had a really good feeling from the people who were running it. The guy who's the president of the Big Ten Network, who's still here, is Mark Silverman, and he is great. And then I met with Jim Delaney also. I mean, he was kind of part of that recruiting process. And I was just blown away by those two guys. And I really felt like there was a great chance for it to succeed. And it was an opportunity for me, frankly. I had never, even when I was in local news, I'd kind of never been the lead guy. And certainly I wasn't on ESPN. There's so many guys. I don't know that anyone is. But if anyone is, it certainly wasn't me. And, so there was this opportunity to, wow, this could be really cool, to kind of, this is my conference. I'm a college football guy, and the Big Ten is the league I grew up in, and it was a chance to come home. But I did feel like, to answer your question, it had a chance to be really successful. Whether it had a chance to be something that changed the face of college sports, no, I probably didn't sense that. But it became apparent pretty quickly. I mean, really, once we got everyone on board after that first season, in distribution-wise, first year we weren't on in a lot of places. But then by the second season, it was like, wow, this is amazing. People get it. And we started to get a lot of feedback of how much people were enjoying it. And at that point, it kind of seemed inevitable that some other leagues would head in that direction. And, of course, that's exactly what's happened.
What I didn't realize was that before you got into sportscasting, you were an investment banker, New York City, Chase Manhattan, coming out of Northwestern. What was the moment when you were like, I can't do this anymore? I got to talk about sports.
Pretty much the first day. It's a long story. Investment banker, I think, is overstated. I worked as a financial analyst in the Chase's kind of training program where they take people out of college and try to turn them into bankers. And I don't know. I was mulling around a lot of different things that I might do, and that seemed like something. I got offered a job there, and I wanted to go to New York, and I thought, okay, well, this would be something to try out. But really, from day one, I hated it, and I think it reinforced to me I'd always wanted to be a sportscaster. And I think it just reinforced that if I don't try this, I'm going to be miserable. Like, I can't do this for 40, however many more years of, kind of living for the weekend and not enjoying my job. And so I just figured I'll just take this leap. I'll see whether it works out. And I've just been incredibly fortunate that it has. But that would have been the worst year of my life. I'd say it's pretty safe to say.
So you sold out. You chased the big bucks in Sherman, Texas at KXII, right? I mean, you left everything behind. You just wanted to chase the big bucks and then Quad Cities and everything.
Yeah, I was a little bit of a curiosity when I got to Sherman, Texas. Like, this is the guy who moved from New York City. So that was interesting. But you know what? It's great. I mean, I don't know what your path has been in this business, but you learn so much along the way. And I learned a ton in the small markets, and I was fortunate to only have to do that for 3 years. But I think back to those experiences all the time. And first of all, I'm so grateful for where I am. I think unless you've spent a little time in the minors, you can't really appreciate being in the majors. But also, there are incredible people there. There were amazingly talented people who I work with, and I learned a lot from those people. And, especially my first station in Sherman, Texas, it was a great station, and there were smart people who knew television. And, I learned more than, for me, that was my grad school. I don't have any training in this. I was a history major in college. And so that opportunity, and I always tell kids who are, thinking about getting into broadcasting, and if they're a production assistant here, or especially kids who came up to me at ESPN and said, I want to be on the air. I was like, well, what are you doing here? Go somewhere where they'll put you on the air. It doesn't matter where it is. No one's going to say, hey, Joe in screening, Stuart Scott called in sick today. We need you to anchor Sports Center. Or could you fill in for Greeny on Mike and Mike? I mean, that's not going to happen. So, you know what? You go somewhere where they'll put you on the air and just do it. And that was what I did. And obviously, it's worked out great.
Yeah, I know. I have kids the same way come up to me and say, how do I get into sports talk and how to get on the air? And my first job was in Fort Myers, Florida, and I did everything, whether it was on the air or producing or writing or production. And I go, you got to go somewhere like that and make your mistakes and learn there because, I mean, my shows back then were awful. I mean, they're not very much better now, but, I mean, they were really awful. And, and I think there's a lot of kids that come out of school and go, well, now I'm going to start in New York or Chicago or L.A. And you're like, no. That's not how this whole thing starts.
You know what the worst thing to happen to our society is, Damon? It's Facebook, right? Because everyone thinks now, okay, those guys, they were, in college and they're billionaires, right? So I'm just going to all of a sudden come up with the idea, I'm the guy, and I should just come out of school and I should be, a millionaire, billionaire like those guys, or I should be front and center. And I do think, and I'm not trying to sit here and be one of those, our society's gone down the toilet and, what's wrong with kids today. But I think we do live in an instant gratification society. And I think any business, whether I would, if I had stayed in banking or if you want to be an attorney or whatever you want to do, anything, if it's working with your hands, you have to go somewhere where you can do it and where you can learn. And I think that there's just this resistance to that in this day and age. And again, it's true of a lot of different areas, but it is frustrating to see because, to me, that's where you learn. And you have to have your eye on moving to where you want to be and doing what you want to do. But you also have to take that experience in and take it for what it is, which is a great time to learn.
The fact is, Sherman, Texas is not great for Instagramming, and so that's why nobody is wanting to go down there. Dave Revsine, you can follow him on Twitter at BTN Dave Revsine for the latest from the Big Ten Network, as he's the lead host there, but also the new book, The Opening Kickoff, The Tumultuous Birth of a Football Nation, the Start of College Football. It's available on Amazon, although I think it's sold out right now, or out of stock at least at this point. So this thing is selling pretty well, and for good reasons, getting a lot of good reviews. So congratulations.
Yeah, we had a new shipment go out to them today, so they should have it maybe as early as tomorrow. But yeah, it was. On one hand, that's great. I mean, it means a lot of people are buying it. On the other hand, it was a little jarring to log on the other day and to see that. But it is sold incredibly well, and it's really been neat. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about it, Damon, because as you can tell, I'm kind of passionate about it.
No doubt about it. It's great. It's really fascinating, and it's awesome to see it doing so well. Dave, it's a pleasure really to catch up. Thanks so much. Congratulations on the success of the book, and maybe we can do this again during the rest of the college football season.
Anytime. I'd be happy to come on. Thanks for having me, Damon.
All right, welcome to part number 2 of the Permission Granted podcast, episode 4, and a reminder that we are available on iTunes. Subscribe there for it automatically uploaded to your iPad, your iTunes, or your iPod, however you do listen to the show. And then also, we are on YouTube, youtube.com/The DA Show. Subscribe there, and you'll get it automatically uploaded there as well. So, all right, joined now by Mraz and Dave Revsine, who people probably remember from his days on ESPN, hosting SportsCenter, now on the Big Ten Network. This is a really cool book, and, you know, we talk about college football so much here on the show, Mraz, but I think it's very enlightening to remember that while it kind of feels like the sky's falling all the time in college football, it's kind of always been sky is falling, going back to like over 100 years.
It's all about the money, D.A., M-O-N-E-Y.
M-O-N-E-Y.
And that's the way he made it seem. It's the truth. It's a business, even though they act like it's not a business, and it's all about the money.
And Revsine, I mean, goes back, and this is a time and period that I don't think anybody can really relate to. Over 100 years ago, that's like 1910, 1920. These are just, it's a totally different world. And to think that how much sports has changed, baseball and football and basketball. I mean, there wasn't even an NBA at that point in time, barely an NHL. The idea that all the problems we kind of lament about college football now was happening then, it does kind of give you reason to not be as down on college football because you're like, well, it's survived this long being that corrupt anyway.
It kind of makes you feel like we're going to be sitting here. Well, not we will be, but in 100 years, you're going to be having the same kind of problems. And maybe they're just magnified now because of the internet and because of social media, and there's more emphasis on it.
There's no doubt, though, that there's such a problem in college football because of the money and them trying to still pass this off as higher education that every year, I mean, look, we're talking about the college football playoff from day one of this season, and that's because it's worth billions of dollars. The idea that they're trying to still pass this off as academic institutions, first and foremost, it's just so ridiculous that it's hard to always take that seriously.
If it was just about academics, then only students would be going to these games, and you wouldn't have people piling in there, spending how much money on tickets, how much money on parking passes, and all this basically committing for a whole season.
So when Revsine, the interview was really cool with Revsine. The book sounds awesome. I got to read some passages of it, but not all the way through. But it sounds awesome. But I think what's also really interesting is this kind of ever-evolving sports landscape where those power football programs, maybe even more so than the power basketball programs, the power football programs are going to rule the earth forevermore. I mean, that's just where everything is going to revolve around now.
Yeah, and it's true the way he spoke about how the schools sell their football or use their football programs to sell the schools, which I think is exactly right. And I've said this for a long time. I went to a small school. I enjoy the fact that I went to a small school, but kind of if I look back, I wish I got to go to one of these D1 schools and experience being part of that, experience going to football games every week, experience being an alumni and being part of something bigger. If not for the football or even the basketball, so to speak, what is almost the point of traveling out that far to go to one of these D1 schools? You ain't going for the math classes.
Yeah, I mean, I went to Syracuse, and I wish I went to a big-time Division I football school, too. I mean, that would have been a lot of fun. That would have been a lot of fun. No, but it's good to catch up with Revsine. And I thought it was really interesting, just his journey through broadcasting, right? I mean, how many of us, you and I went to school to try to become broadcasters and go into communications. He did not have that background, and he went into investment banking and then realized,
he realized that this is not my bit. And, boy, I mean, so then he left for the small towns, the small cities that you start working your way up in. But, I mean, you don't hear that story ever, that a guy started in investment banking and ended up, on SportsCenter.
Hey, very blessed. I kind of wish I could have started with something else and did that, but I had to put in the good hard work in the school to do that with all the broadcasting classes and sitting there learning about PPM meters and all this stuff. Nobody would have any idea what they are.
Could you imagine making whatever you make as an investment banker? Even he says he was an intern or whatever, but I know those entry-level positions, they start really well. Could you imagine starting there and then being like, nah, I'm going to give this up, and deciding to go work for $21,000 a year in El Paso or wherever he was, his first job was? I mean, you got to really try to make it work.
You really have to have a little passion, too, for it, too, because sitting there, on the overnights talking about, basically curling up in Quebec, it's a little tough.
My first job in Fort Myers, Florida, it was full-time, and I was so thankful because I had that meant that I had health insurance, and to that point I was just working hourly shifts, and whatever the shift money was. I was making $18,500, $18,500 in my first job, and I was full time, and I thought I was rich. I was like, this is amazing. And granted, this is 2002, so it's not quite 2014, but I was like, this is great. I look back, and I'm pretty sure I was below the poverty line. I'm pretty sure that legally I was below the poverty line at that point.
See, as long as I can afford chicken wings and a little beer and, a kind of a roof over my head in Florida, I think I'd be okay.
But this is why you lived at home for so long, because 18.5 at home goes a long way.
Of course it does.
18.5 at home is all profit.
Of course, and now I make a little more money and I move really far from home. That's how it works. You get to live the dream. When you get to be full-time, you can move 6 houses away from your parents and live the dream.
You are literally 6 houses away down the block.
You've counted. The only caveat is it's 6 houses, but you do have to cross the street.
That's true. You are not on the same street. So they are an even number, you're an odd number?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't even know my address because I just know that I still have my mail sent to my parents.
Come on, Mraz.
I do. I honestly do not know my address because I've lived at the same address my whole life until then. I just know how to get there, and I know my street.
You don't even know your current address, and you've lived there for how long?
10 months now. So if anybody asks me where to come visit, I give them my parents' address, and I say, and then just keep going to the end of the block, the last house on the left.
That's true, because when you told me to come to the block party, you gave me your parents' address.
I literally could not. I know it starts with an 8. I couldn't tell you my address. I could not tell you, and my wife gets so angry at that.
Well, what number is your parents' house?
It's 815.
They're 815, so you have to be an even number. So if you're 6 houses down and it goes up, it's probably 817, 819, 821. You're probably like 824.
I don't know. It's all out of whack there. I could be like 74. I honestly have no idea. Even when I order stuff online, I literally have it sent to my parents. I put on the flip-flops, and I go up and check the mailbox up the block.
You're a disgrace.
It's a nice community center.
Before we get out of here, Cowboys fans are on the bridge right now, and
Wouldn't you be?
Yeah, exactly. So we're on 105.3 The Fan, and then we're on a couple of other affiliates throughout the state of Texas, 610 Sports Radio in Houston. A lot of Texans fans there, obviously. But Cowboys fans already after week one, I mean, they are some of our most vocal listeners and callers and have been since day one. This is DEFCON 4 already after week one, because if they're not angry, they're totally checked out. They don't care.
And they were angry yesterday. I have a sad feeling. We love our Cowboy fans. I have a sad feeling they're going to be checked out by week 8. Peel back the curtain here a little bit. Ronnie in Dallas, one of our favorite Cowboy callers, was so upset he didn't want to get on the air on Sunday night. Just wanted to tell me how angry he was, how ticked off he was, and how he literally will not go to a game this season, and he's trying to tell everybody else to stop watching the games.
He's just venting to you.
Just venting. I had to put other calls on hold, and I just let him go for about, how Ronnie could be. I let him go on me for 6 minutes, and then he popped in with the end and tell DA I said hi.
And this is not unique. There are Cowboys fans already, and we are after week one saying, I'm out, I'm disgusted, and I'm not watching. And the worst thing you can be, if you're loved, you're hated, it's fine. The worst thing you can be is irrelevant. And the Cowboys are bordering on irrelevant in their own state and their own city after week one.
It's so fascinating, so unbelievable. And you think about how bad a year the Texas Rangers had. You're getting to a time where Dallas Mavericks basketball and Dallas Stars hockey is going to take prominence during football season in the Fort Worth, Texas area.
Crazy. All right, coming up next is going to be the side B of the Permission Granted podcast. The producer side, Mraz and Brock are going to break things down coming up next. A little Big Ten action there, and then the week one of the NFL season, plus some picks for them. And we remind you can subscribe to us on iTunes and then also on YouTube, youtube.com/The DA Show.
Welcome into Side B of the Permission Granted podcast with myself, Kenny Brock from the Wheels of Steel, and the executive producer of the DA show, Sean Mraz. We have just wrapped up week 1 in the NFL season, full slate of college football, full slate of NFL. Everything is in the rear view now. We all, kind of have a gauge on where our team might be or where they stand after week 1. Mraz, how you feeling?
I'm feeling okay. It's good to be back after a week off from the podcast.
Yeah, it is. We missed you last week, but very thankful to Mike Diaz for being able to fill in on such short notice with you coming down with, Ebola and whatever the hell else you had going on there. But are you feeling better?
I feel much better. Could have been the swine flu. Nice to see Mike Diaz come up with a big Lenny Harris pinch hit.
Yeah. Anyways, a lot of things to get into, and let's just jump right into it. Mraz, you know me. I am a diehard Ohio State fan. I am a Big Ten apologist to my core. But after this weekend's performance, I can no longer defend the Big Ten. They are maybe they are the worst of the Power 5 conferences. They are right down there with the ACC. I mean, Ohio State blowing that lead at home and then losing to Vatech like they did. Michigan putting up a goose egg
Embarrassing.
Against Notre Dame. And then Michigan State, they battled for a while, but they just didn't have enough guns and enough horses to hang with Oregon. Where does the Big Ten go from here?
It's ugly, and you're talking about all the obviously the big dogs in the
Right.
Big Ten, the bottom feeders too. You're talking about Purdue.
Well, and we've always known that the bottom of the Big Ten is also some of the worst in college football, but this
Right.
is just adding insult to injury.
Basically, MAC schools running through the bottom feeders, Rutgers struggling with Howard, and Nebraska at home struggling with McNeese State, needing basically a prayer there at the end to win that game. It's a very, very ugly week here for the Big Ten. It's really interesting. I mean, you really have to look at the whole situation and truly wonder, are they getting a team in the playoff? And I think the answer today is no.
I think it's too early to say, this is week 2 of the college football season. It is way too early to jump to conclusions. I think that this always happens. A team always loses a game early, and we don't think that they'll be in contention late. So we don't know what's going to happen, but this is a big black eye, and especially because it's coming against non-conference opponents. Last week, in week 1, you had Wisconsin blowing a 17-point lead to an SEC school. You have Michigan State losing to a Pac-12 school. You have Ohio State losing to an ACC school. I mean, these are games that they need to win out of conference because they're going to beat each other up in the Big Ten. The cream's going to rise to the top. Ohio State's going to beat who they should beat most likely. Michigan, we don't know what they're going to be. Michigan State will probably run through everybody. Wisconsin will probably rebound nicely. But it's not going to matter because when the playoff committee looks back at the beginning of the season, because they're going to evaluate from start to finish, this is really, really hurting Jim Delaney and the Big Ten because for them to not have a team in the Final Four playoff in the first year in its inception, I mean, that is an absolute disgrace.
Total disgrace, and I couldn't agree with you more. And you really think about the Big Ten this year, with Michigan State going out there and blowing the lead they had with Oregon, a lot of people would have said when Braxton went down that they were the team that could potentially make that playoff.
And even before Braxton went down, a lot of people were saying that Michigan State was the prohibitive favorite in the Big Ten.
So now, are they literally, do they have a shot, number one? And number two, are they literally the only team who still does
Michigan
have a
State.
shot? Yes, Michigan State.
Yeah, I would say Michigan State still has a shot because if they
Is Penn State alive now?
Penn State is absolutely alive. Obviously, the news came down that their bowl ban is lifted, and for the last 2 years, so now they are bowl eligible this year. I'm not going to say that they're going to win the Big Ten, but I think that this is going to give that program a big shot in the arm because they've been playing well last year. Obviously, the changeover from Bill O'Brien to James Franklin, but they have Christian Hackenberg, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, if not the best pro-style quarterback in the country, who's going to give them, a lot of opportunities to win games, at home and on the road because he's shown that he can play well on both fields. But I'm not ready to crown them Big Ten champs yet. They get Ohio State at home, which is huge. Traveling to Happy Valley is not an easy task. So I think Penn State now, they are definitely in contention for, definitely causing some trouble and causing a little bit of ruckus. But I think this is still Michigan State's conference to win. And obviously I have to, fess up here. I picked Ohio State in Brock's Locks. I picked them to get to the Final Four. Obviously not looking good now. Not completely out of
You're not going to call the dream dead.
No, I'm not going to call it dead, but I'm going to say that, there was definitely some homerism there with me. I thought that the Ohio State's offense was going to be about the puzzle and not the piece, but it turns out that Braxton Miller was the puzzle and not just the piece.
I'll give you a spin-off there.
Sure.
Is Virginia Tech better than we thought they were coming into the year under Frank Beamer? They hadn't beat a team that highly ranked since, I believe it was 2004. Are they going to be a team that's at least in the mix in the ACC with Florida State?
Yeah, I mean, you have to say that after, a big road win on a Saturday night in a hostile environment.
I guess my point is that not as bad a loss as we think it is for Ohio State?
Yeah, I don't think it's not an egregious loss. They didn't lose to, Eastern Michigan or somebody like that. They lost to a legitimate ACC team. Vatek is still, like you said, they've kind of been on the downsides for the last couple years, but they're still a power conference team, and they're still one of the tops in the ACC. So you can't dismiss Frank Beamer and what he does defensively, and obviously Beamer ball with the special teams because they always make plays happen. So, no, I don't think it's the most egregious loss, but it's a loss that you cannot have at home.
Okay, and now let's move on to the pro side of things as we just discussed the college.
Right.
With the NFL, Week 1 is in the books now. And basically, it's the same thing we hear every year after Week 1 in the NFL. What you thought you know, you probably don't know.
Absolutely.
But there are still some things we know. And what we know is that the Dallas Cowboys defense is terrible.
Awful.
But maybe we didn't expect Tony Romo to be this bad. We have a ton of Cowboy fans. It's a huge listenership here to the mothership.
105.3 The Fan is one of the best.
They are jumping off the ship, not the mothership. They're jumping off the Cowboy ship pretty quickly.
They might be jumping
here.
off the mothership soon, too.
And let's start with a couple points from that game. Number one, the amount of 49er fans that were in Jerry World.
That's embarrassing.
It is ridiculous. And, I could say this. I've lived in New York. I've gone to giant Cowboy games. You've
Right.
seen when the Cowboys play the Jets. The Cowboys have a big fan base in New York and the metropolitan
Well, they have
area.
a big fan base across the country.
Everywhere. They're America's team for a reason.
Right.
But within that Dallas-Fort Worth area, you can't let Jerry build that stadium and your stadium get infiltrated. And you know what? He's basically built like the Disney World of the NFL, where that is a destination. If your team is playing at Dallas,
Right.
you're going to make the trek and going
Yeah,
to make the travel.
absolutely.
And you know what? I think if the Cowboys have that bad a year, they're going to fall off that 8-8 clip. You're going to see a lot more of that this year with any team that comes into Dallas.
I mean, honestly, where does this team go from here? They lost, DeMarcus Ware defensively obviously hurts. They lost their second round. They're one of their draft picks who got injured in the preseason. Whose name
Lawrence, yes.
Lawrence. He's out. He was supposed to, kind of bolster that defensive line. Sean Lee injured again. I mean, there's just so many question marks with this defense.
Not good.
And we talked about this a lot, you and I, about how dangerous that offense can be. It did not look dangerous at all because you have Des Bryant and you have DeMarco Murray, and
Right.
you have
Terrence
Terrence
Williams and
Williams
Cole Beasley and
Jason Witten. Those guys, they're obviously high-octane people in an offense, but boy, they looked and let's, the San Francisco 49ers had a great defense last year and the year before, for the past couple years.
Not
but
a
they
great
are
defense.
and they are not the defense that they were last year. Bowman out, their secondary banged up, their defensive line missing a couple key guys, including Alden Smith. But Justin Smith had his way with anybody on that on that offensive line on Sunday.
Right. I think speaking to that, a couple points I'll make on that.
Yeah.
The game ended up 28-17. It was not as close as the score indicated, number one.
No.
Number two, I think when all is said and done this year, we're going to look back at the 49ers, and while they could probably be in that wild card mix, they're not going to be nearly as good as they were the last few seasons. So I think this loss might be a lot worse on paper later on than it's showing right now. And to top that off, we had a lot of callers call into the DA show and discuss it. It was a pizza delivery man who basically said his pizza business is hurting because Cowboy fans are tuning out of these games and not ordering pizzas for the right off the bat on opening day. So things could get ugly here. You're literally talking about an economy hitting Dallas. I mean, the Schwartz is looking for the free pizzas in Dallas, whatever the version is there, isn't existing. And this is just going to continue to happen, and you're going to see more and more road fans in there, and this could get really ugly for Jerry Jones really quick. And it speaks to his whole point about a business. Maybe he will get madder and madder every day about not drafting Johnny Manziel, but it's probably because he thinks more fans will be in the seats to see Manziel than actually
it's not about the wins.
Right, it's not about the wins,
No.
and that's a problem. Until it becomes about the wins, which may not be until Jerry is no longer owning this team,
Yeah.
the Cowboys are in deep trouble.
And what is it? Since he took over as GM and everything, they're 136 and 136 now, 136 and 137 as a record.
Right.
So I mean, it just
literally
speaks to the mediocrity.
500 hovering around the middle of the league constantly.
Where do they go from here? I mean, what can they do to? I mean, offensively, you can't add any more pieces at this point. Do you just hope that Romo turns it around?
And they're in a really uncomfortable position because with their salary cap, they have a lot of money going to Brandon Carr, who should be making that
Right.
much more money. And I'll tell you another guy who, if you look at the wheel and the pieces of pie, guys who are making a lot of money, Witten is making way too much money under that cap for the age
that
he's
age,
at.
yeah.
And he might have to bite the bullet after the year because they have to sign Dez and they have to keep Dez long term. Or does Dez get very disgruntled now that this contract isn't done?
I could see that.
And see this team trending downward and not want to be a part of it after the year. This is going to be ugly times. It's going to be a lot uglier before it gets better in Dallas.
Yeah, and you know what? As an Eagles fan and you as a Giants fan, we understand we don't want our team going 500. We don't want the mediocrity. We want the success of the team.
You'd rather be a playoff team or
give me
picking
the
in the
bottom
top
feeder.
five, right?
Absolutely. And the Eagles, and the Cowboys, just haven't done that, and they've just left their fan base hanging there in purgatory for all these years. And it's just, at what point, what does it take for Jerry Jones to relinquish control and realize that he needs help building that team?
Exactly.
I think this might be the year. I mean, realistically, they go 4-12, 5-11, something like that. I think that has to smack them right in the face and just say, all right, Jerry, it's time to give it up and bring somebody else in who knows what the hell they're doing.
It really is embarrassing. Well, moving on to peel the curtain back, as we like to do here on the Permission Granted podcast. Peter Schwartz took over your fantasy team. You had a lot of bad juju for not paying
Awful.
Diaz. The voodoo doll was out. Peter Schwartz gets off to, and our listeners may want to hear this, a 1-0 start after
With
week
my
one.
team without making any changes.
Without making any changes.
Which was ranked as the worst draft in our league, by the way.
So analyst Diaz takes a shot there, not Commissioner Diaz.
Absolutely.
Now, Peter Schwartz gets the win. You recently had your birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
As we move on to a week, you are now since removed as the owner of this fantasy team. Do you feel like the bad juju, the dark cloud that hovered over you is gone, kaput, finito?
There's still some, I'm getting the aftershocks of an earthquake here. Obviously,
you have a better aura here, though.
Yeah, I know. I feel a lot better. I was feeling kind of just down in the dumps recently with everything. I had a lot of stuff going on, with the show, just, me making mistakes that I normally don't make. And then, stuff outside of the show, nothing serious, but it's just like everything just seemed to be trending downwards. And then I think the coup de grace was Ohio State losing on Saturday night. So I'm hoping that was the last bit.
You know what? You as an Eagle fan, the Eagles were down 17-0. They made that big second half comeback.
Yeah.
Maybe the second half comeback of the Eagles is the come on in Kenny Brock's life.
I think we need
and you're
it.
going to have a good week here.
And we're coming off the, my 1 week bowl sanctions that I imposed on myself. So,
Listen, be honest, though. We're going to speak about those bowl sanctions.
Yeah.
Did you or did you not have at least a ghost draft of picks? And how would they have done this week? Do we have that answer? Don't lie to us. Don't lie to me.
I'm not going to reveal that. I don't want to incriminate myself in any way because that would just get me into a heap of hot water. But I did get some requests via Twitter about what my picks may or may not have been, and I answered some questions. But I will not give you specifics on what I would have done.
Right, because you're a fraud and you don't want anything coming out. So that just speaks to us, and that tells us you had a bad week gambling on your own, legally, of course, in the college football
world. To be honest,
world.
I literally did not place one bet this weekend. I completely removed myself.
Mentally, did you bet?
No.
Mentally, you didn't have any idea.
Saturday was legitimately my birthday, so I was kind of out and about, and I wasn't completely locked in. If I'm like, if I'm on a bowl sanction, I'm going to enjoy my birthday instead of sitting in front of the TV. So that's what I did.
Well, I don't know if you noticed. Now so we're even at a week because you got a jump start on a week, and I don't know if you've noticed. I am 2-1 in the as DA likes to call them Sodium Licks picks.
Licks picks.
Big 1-game lead for me in the win column there.
Now, let me just bring something up here because you failed to mention it on the show last week when you made your picks, and it drives me up a wall. In your blog, in your opening, I think 2 sentences, you take shots at me, which is completely uncalled for.
Well, first of all, it shows how much you read because it was my opening 2 sentences in my picks portion, which is not until the second page of the blog.
Yeah, well, what the
Thank
hell
you
else
for
do I
being
care
a caring
about?
friend.
I honestly, it's like reading a child's pop-up picture book. I don't need any of the fluff.
I barely color in between the lines. At least I am coherent enough to type up a little blog there. And if it wasn't for the food behind it, I don't know if the passion would be there.
No, I don't know. I can't, sully my mind with.
For those wondering, too, a little self-promotion, the peanut butter and jelly puffs came out tremendous this weekend.
What are you, 6?
I have quite the treat coming this weekend on Up the Gut.
Well, that's a tease. Now we'll have to wait till Friday morning to get that. But, you went on in your first couple sentences of the picks portion of your blog, and you started talking about you're guaranteeing a winning record, a better record than me and Brock's Locks and everything. You got some gall, pal. You almost had your picks taken away last year. You finished 6 games over 500.
That is plus money, as we like to call it in the business.
Yeah, okay, and I was plus 15, pal. Okay. I barely lost the last couple months.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, you barely lost because you didn't bet any bowl games.
You have a lot of stones coming at me. I'm atop the
stones.
perch right now.
I got stones, I got pebbles, I got everything, and I'll keep coming at you.
You got pebbles is what you got. There's no doubt about that. But you got a lot of. Yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Coming at me is some little move for you. All right, you know what? I had the bad juju week 1. When I go 3-0 this weekend, now
is that a guarantee? Is that right?
I am completely motivated. I am so motivated to bury you every single week. I have just become, just in this 30 seconds that we started talking about it, I have remotivated, rededicated. You're a dead man walking, pal.
Listen, you can bury me all you want. I got the shovel. It's about to hit you in the face, and you're going to be long lost
Mr.
behind.
Brooks with Kevin Costner?
I'm trying to come up with analogies here on the fly. I'm trying to come back at you a little bit. Listen, regardless, it's good. I think it's healthy for the show to have a little picks rivalry.
Yeah.
But here's all you need to know.
But the rivalry
Scoreboard.
There's
2-1.
scoreboard.
2-1 for me.
Week in.
1-2 for you. and you basically probably would have failed this week. So let's be honest. And that's where we're at.
A lot of assumptions going on here. All right, so that'll do it for the side B of the Permission Granted podcast. Remember, subscribe to us on iTunes, rate us, give us some feedback on what you think. Check it out on YouTube, youtube.com/The DA Show. That'll be posted when the podcast goes up as well on iTunes. Don't forget, on Twitter, DA on CBS will tweet it out. I'll tweet it out at KBrockJR. At Sean Mraz CBS will also tweet it out. So we're hitting you from all angles. We got everything covered for you. We're so happy that football's back, and we're looking forward to getting into this every single week, recapping the week that was, and a little preview of the week coming. So thanks for tuning in, and we will speak to you next week.